This morning, a cold silence settled over Russia, not the quiet of peace, but the stillness of paralysis. Across dozens of cities, from Ekaterinburg to Moscow, central heating systems began to fail almost simultaneously. Apartment blocks went dark, radiators stopped humming, and the temperature inside homes dropped below freezing. Official channels called it a technical malfunction, a phrase now used so often it has lost all meaning. But according to documents circulating among regional administrators, the truth is far more severe. The country's district heating network, the largest on Earth, is suffering a cascading systems collapse. Millions are affected. The crisis is spreading faster than the government can respond. By mid-morning, the pattern had become unmistakable. In major urban centers, pressure sensors failed in synchronized intervals, suggesting a systemic fault rather than isolated damage. Local dispatchers, overwhelmed by the volume of emergency calls, quietly admitted that parts of the infrastructure were beyond repair. In Moscow's outer districts, entire neighborhoods reported days without heat. Schools canceled classes, hospitals began rationing electricity to power portable boilers, and residents turned to gas stoves and candles for warmth. Social networks flooded with images of frost-covered windows, children wrapped in coats, and apartment thermometers reading below 10 degrees. Yet, on state television, anchors smiled under warm studio lights, speaking calmly of temporary difficulties. Insiders within the Ministry of Energy described the situation as the inevitable outcome of years of neglect. The sanctions imposed after the invasion of Ukraine deprived Russia of vital components, pressure valves, temperature regulators, industrial pumps, once imported from Germany, Sweden, and Finland. Domestic factories promised substitutes, but the quality was inconsistent, and repairs that once took days now take weeks. A senior engineer from Tver, speaking anonymously, summarized it bluntly: the system is 70 years old. It's dying, and no one knows how to save it. For the Kremlin, this crisis cuts deeper than infrastructure. It strikes at the symbolic heart of Russian power, energy. For decades, Moscow presented its control of gas and heat as proof of self-sufficiency, the lifeblood of a vast empire immune to foreign pressure. But now, that symbol is turning against it. Russia heats Europe, one propaganda slogan once boasted. Today, Europe is warm, and Russia is freezing. The irony is so sharp that even officials struggle to contain it. According to multiple regional sources, emergency reserves meant for industrial and military use have been quietly redirected to sustain key urban heating grids, including parts of Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's a desperate measure, one that underscores how thin the margin for stability has become. Behind closed doors, governors are pleading for federal intervention, but the central ministries are paralyzed. The coordination system that once defined Russia's command economy now works against it. Every region waits for permission to act, and by the time it comes, the pipelines have already frozen. The silence from the Kremlin is deafening. No national emergency has been declared, no official acknowledgement of the scale of the disaster. Yet, as the temperature continues to drop, so does public patience. The first signs of unrest are appearing: local protests, small but growing, carried by voices that until recently were silent. "We can survive war," one Moscow resident told an independent outlet, "but not winter without heat." And in those few words lies the truth no minister dares to speak aloud: Moscow's war is turning inward, and this time, the enemy is the cold. By midday, the situation had outgrown even the Kremlin's ability to disguise it. Internal communications from regional administrations, leaked through independent channels, reveal the scope of what officials now call a national-scale infrastructure emergency. Dozens of heating plants across the Volga region and western Siberia have gone offline entirely. Some from fuel shortages, others from equipment collapse. Pressure in major pipelines is dropping by the hour. In cities like Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod, and Tula, emergency crews are ordered to stabilize key zones, meaning government buildings, hospitals, and military complexes, while residential neighborhoods are left to adapt. The word adapt now stands in for abandonment. As one local administrator in Perm admitted quietly, "We can't fix this anymore. We can only decide where to let it fail first." What makes this crisis more explosive than any previous outage is its simultaneity. Heating failures are cascading across thousands of kilometers of interconnected grids. Engineers warn that once pipes freeze completely, they burst from within, irreversible damage that could render whole districts uninhabitable until spring. Experts estimate that nearly 15% of Russia's urban heating capacity has already been lost. But numbers tell only part of the story. Across the country, the human toll is beginning to show: people sleeping in stairwells where residual heat lingers, families boiling water to create steam in sealed rooms, elderly residents refusing to leave their freezing homes for fear of looting. These are not isolated acts of hardship, they are snapshots of a state unraveling in slow motion. Inside government circles, panic is rising behind the facade of control. The Ministry of Energy insists that repairs are ongoing, but insiders say the workforce itself has collapsed. Thousands of qualified engineers left the country during last year's mobilization, and those who remain are stretched thin across hundreds of critical sites. Replacement crews are often untrained or working without proper tools. "They send us to fix things we don't have parts for," said one technician in the Orenburg region. "They tell us to keep the pressure steady, but the gauges haven't worked in years." Such admissions, shared in whispers, echo through every layer of the energy sector. The illusion of stability has finally met the limits of physics. And while local governments struggle, the center remains silent. No address from the president, no national emergency declaration. State media has shifted from denial to distraction, airing segments on foreign crises to divert attention from domestic chaos. But social networks, despite growing censorship, have become impossible to suppress. Videos circulate hourly, residents breaking open sealed valves, municipal workers welding pipes in sub-zero temperatures, entire streets without electricity or heat. The comments below them reveal a tone rarely heard in Russia, anger mixed with disbelief. "We were told the war would make us stronger," one user writes, "but it's our own country that's falling apart." The symbolism is unmistakable. The state that once prided itself on exporting energy to the world cannot provide warmth to its own citizens. In the eyes of many, this isn't just a failure of governance, it's the end of a myth. The energy superpower is freezing from within. International observers, watching closely, note that this kind of crisis erodes not only infrastructure but authority. When people stop believing the system can keep them alive, one European analyst observed, they stop fearing it too. For now, the government's greatest concern is not the cold itself, but the reaction it could ignite. A population once hardened by propaganda is learning that loyalty doesn't heat a home. Still, officials cling to their script. They speak of temporary stress, repair progress, local challenges. But behind the controlled language lies something raw and unfamiliar: helplessness. The calls for help from regional governors are no longer requests, they are warnings. And those who hear them know that if the grid continues to collapse, the consequences won't just be logistical. They will be political. The cold is not just freezing pipes anymore, it's freezing the machinery of control. By early afternoon, the crisis reached the very heart of the capital. Moscow, the city that was supposed to remain untouchable, insulated from the chaos of the provinces, began to fracture under the same pressure. In the western districts, entire residential complexes lost heat without warning. In the industrial zone of Lublino, a major distribution hub suffered a full system failure after an underground pipeline burst, flooding an entire block with scalding steam before freezing solid within hours. Residents stood in disbelief as emergency crews cut through ice-coated streets, their torches illuminating what looked less like repair work and more like excavation. "The ground itself is cracking," one engineer was heard saying. "We're not fighting the cold anymore, we're fighting collapse." Inside government buildings, the temperature was rising, not in the pipes, but in the meetings. According to leaked minutes from an emergency session of the presidential administration, senior officials clashed over whether to declare a nationwide state of emergency. Some argued it was the only way to unlock military resources for civilian use, others feared the political symbolism would be fatal. "Once you admit a crisis, you lose control of it," one participant warned. Yet, as reports poured in from dozens of regions, denial became harder to sustain. In the city of Tver, schools suspended classes indefinitely. In Vladimir, morgues reported freezer malfunctions, forcing workers to store bodies outdoors. These details did not appear in any official statement, but the network of silence could not keep pace with the speed of information. For the first time in years, the Kremlin's famed vertical chain of power began to short-circuit. Governors stopped waiting for federal instructions and started issuing local decrees on their own, prioritizing heat for hospitals and barracks while cutting entire residential zones off the grid. The center's grip on coordination was slipping, and with it, the illusion of unity that held the system together. "It's every region for itself now," said one insider at the Ministry of Emergency Situations. "Moscow can't fix this, it can only watch." What makes this moment particularly dangerous is the intersection of infrastructure and psychology. The Russian state is built on the idea of endurance, the notion that suffering is survivable as long as the state remains unbroken. But as temperatures inside homes drop below freezing, that compact begins to crumble. People are discovering that the government's power does not extend to warmth, that patriotism cannot replace heat. "We don't need enemies," a resident of Ryazan told a local reporter. "The cold is doing their work for them." Such statements, once unthinkable, now spread across messaging platforms faster than censors can delete them. It is no longer the opposition shaping public mood, it is experience. Meanwhile, the economic consequences are compounding the physical ones. Industrial plants dependent on thermal supply have been forced to shut down, leaving thousands temporarily unemployed. Power stations, overloaded by emergency boilers, are burning through reserves meant for months of operation in a matter of days. Experts warn that if fuel stocks continue depleting at the current rate, electricity shortages could follow by week's end. The system wasn't designed to survive itself, one energy specialist explained. It's cannibalizing what's left. And yet, despite mounting evidence, the Kremlin persists in its performance of control. State television shows footage of repair brigades restoring warmth street by street, accompanied by triumphant music. But viewers recognize the scenery, the same few neighborhoods shown in rotation, filmed hours apart. The rest of the country watches from cold apartments, understanding the unspoken truth: the show is for them, not about them. What remains most striking is the silence of the leadership. The president has not appeared in public since the first reports of failures. His absence has become symbolic, a void mirroring the chill spreading through the nation. In previous crises, there were orders, appearances, reassurances. Now, there is only silence, and the sound of pipes cracking in the cold. Analysts describe this as a psychological shift. When the state disappears, even momentarily, fear transforms into something else: memory. Russians remember how quickly great systems fall once they start to freeze. And this time, as one observer put it, the thaw may not come from above. By the late afternoon, the crisis had crossed the invisible threshold between mismanagement and disintegration. What began as scattered outages was now an uncontainable chain reaction stretching from the Baltic to the Urals. Entire sectors of the national heating grid were being shut down preemptively to prevent explosions caused by frozen pipes. Officials in several regions admitted privately that restoration was no longer realistic. They were simply trying to prevent collapse from spreading faster. In Yaroslavl, engineers reported that pipeline metal had become so brittle under pressure that even minimal vibration could cause ruptures. In Voronezh, a main heating station went offline after the control unit, a relic from the 1980s, overheated and melted its internal wiring. "The system is devouring itself," said one exhausted operator. "We patch one valve, and 5 more burst." Inside Moscow, the government's crisis council met for the third time in 24 hours. According to sources familiar with the discussion, tempers flared as ministers traded accusations. The finance ministry refused to release additional emergency funds, citing budget exhaustion. The energy ministry warned that without immediate military assistance, several regions would face total loss of heating capability. The defense ministry hesitated, fearing that deploying soldiers to domestic repair work would be interpreted as an admission that civilian governance had failed. The stalemate dragged on until an unnamed advisor to the president reportedly intervened: "If you lose heat, you lose control. Choose what collapses first." The line, according to witnesses, ended the argument, but not the paralysis. Beyond the meeting rooms, the social fabric was fraying. In multiple cities, spontaneous gatherings formed outside local administrations. They were small, quiet, but unmistakably defiant: people holding thermoses, candles, handwritten notes reading simply, "We are freezing." Police watched from a distance, uncertain whether to disperse or ignore them. It was not protest in the traditional sense, it was testimony. "No one shouted," recalled one observer from Tula. "They just stood there. You could see their breath in the air." For a country accustomed to visible strength, the quiet was more unsettling than noise. At the same time, the first cracks in the information barrier began to widen. Independent media, broadcasting from abroad, released a series of leaked internal reports showing that at least 8 regional governors had requested federal permission to evacuate parts of their cities, a measure not used since the Soviet collapse. Officially, those requests never arrived. Unofficially, they were rejected to avoid the word that terrifies every official in Moscow: uninhabitable. Once that term enters public discourse, investors vanish, market seize, and the image of control dissolves overnight. And yet, inside government chat channels, that word now appears daily, attached to maps shaded in dark blue, the color used to mark areas without heat. Internationally, the response was cautious but telling. European energy analysts confirmed what Russian officials would not: the grid's design itself had become a liability. "It's too centralized," one expert said. "You can't isolate damage, it cascades." In Brussels and Berlin, policymakers watched with quiet disbelief as Russia's greatest source of power, its energy infrastructure, turned into its most immediate threat. A senior NATO observer summarized it bluntly: the empire that once froze its enemies is now freezing itself. Meanwhile, inside the country, survival has become improvisation. Communities are forming around the few remaining sources of heat: libraries, metro stations, even underground parking garages. Volunteers deliver food and blankets to elderly residents trapped in dark apartments. In rural areas, families are burning whatever they can find: furniture, books, pieces of flooring. The official messaging continues unchanged, repairs are proceeding as planned, but the people no longer listen. They are learning to organize without permission, to endure without orders. The symbolism of this shift is not lost on those watching from within the system. A senior political consultant, once loyal to the administration, described the mood in one sentence: "It's not the temperature that's dangerous, it's the realization that no one is in control anymore." That realization, spreading quietly from city to city, may prove more destabilizing than the cold itself. For decades, fear held Russia together. Now, it's fatigue, the slow, frozen kind that no decree can melt. The question haunting officials tonight is no longer whether the grid can be repaired. It's whether the public's faith, once lost, can ever be restored. And as the frost deepens, the answer grows colder with every passing hour. By evening, Russia's cities lay beneath a silence heavy enough to feel physical, the kind that settles when machinery stops and the air itself freezes. The government's latest bulletin, read in calm tones on national television, claimed that temperature stabilization has begun. But across the country, nothing was stable. In Moscow suburbs, smoke rose from improvised fires in courtyards. In Ekaterinburg, families crowded inside metro stations turned into shelters. In Samara, power flickered on and off, illuminating walls blackened by soot from homemade burners. The official narrative of control had fractured entirely. What remained was endurance, raw, instinctive, and quietly defiant. Inside the Kremlin, the atmosphere was brittle. Advisors spoke in euphemisms: regional stress zones, temporary disconnection sectors, but the maps on the walls told another story: vast territories shaded in blue, signifying total loss of heat. According to internal sources, the President's Security Council convened for an unscheduled midnight session. Some argued for a public address, an acknowledgement of the suffering to restore calm. Others warned that admitting the scale of failure could trigger panic. In the end, they chose silence, the same strategy that had kept the system alive for decades. Yet, this time, silence no longer conveyed strength. It sounded like absence. "The government speaks," one senior bureaucrat said privately, "but the country has stopped listening." The human cost was now impossible to hide. Hospitals rationed electricity, using portable stoves to warm operating rooms. In rural districts, frostbitten patients overwhelmed clinics unequipped to treat them. The elderly were hit hardest. Local authorities quietly instructed morgues to expand temporary capacity. These details, omitted from broadcasts, leaked through anonymous posts and encrypted messages, forming a grim mosaic of the truth. Across social media, the same phrase appeared again and again: "We are surviving, not living." And in that sentence, the mythology of the modern Russian state, of order, security, and control, began to unravel. Internationally, analysts described the crisis not as an energy failure, but as a moment of reckoning. Russia built its identity on power through heat, a European energy strategist observed. Now, it's trapped by it. The irony was almost unbearable: the world's largest energy exporter, paralyzed by its own infrastructure. Even within Moscow's elite, the tone was shifting. Some whispered that the war abroad had finally reached home, not through sanctions or strikes, but through entropy, the slow, inevitable breakdown of a system stretched too far for too long. "This isn't collapse," one former official remarked. "This is exhaustion taking shape." Yet, beneath the despair, something unexpected was stirring. In frozen courtyards and candlelit hallways, neighbors who had never spoken began sharing food, fuel, and warmth. Volunteers organized without instructions. Telegram channels once devoted to propaganda now coordinated aid. In the absence of the state, society began, quietly, cautiously, to remember itself. "For the first time, we're helping each other, not waiting for permission," said a resident of Novgorod. "Maybe this is how we begin again." It was not optimism, but a faint sense of awakening, fragile, almost imperceptible, yet real. As night deepened, the frost thickened, encasing Russia in a quiet both terrifying and strangely revealing. The empire that once commanded obedience through strength now faced its reflection in the cold, a vast, brittle system cracking under its own weight. There would be no single explosion, no dramatic collapse. Just a slow, spreading stillness, like ice forming on a river. And somewhere within that silence, a truth emerged that even the Kremlin could no longer deny: the war that Russia started beyond its borders has turned inward. It is no longer fought with weapons, but with time, neglect, and the unrelenting chill of consequence. For now, the fires still burn, in courtyards, in basements, in the hearts of those who refuse to give in. But as the frost creeps deeper and the lights flicker dimmer, one thought lingers in the frozen air: no empire falls in a day. It freezes, degree by degree, until the people inside it decide they will no longer wait for the thaw.